It's time for another notebook review, but you might be wondering, why is he so dressed up for this video? Well, since I'm going to be reviewing a tuxedo, I definitely don't want to be underdressed for the occasion. Hello and welcome back to LearnLinuxTV. In today's video, I'm going to be reviewing the brand new InfinityBook Pro 14 from Tuxedo Computers. This new model boasts some impressive performance for a 14-inch notebook, yet it still manages to stay lightweight. And that's saying a lot since you can order one with up to an Nvidia RTX 3050 Ti, which is just awesome. And the thing is, this notebook in particular is actually advertising up to 12 hours of battery life. And having an Nvidia GPU in such a small chassis, a 14-inch chassis, is quite unusual, almost like we're living in some other alternate universe where you actually can have a dedicated GPU in a notebook that is going to be lightweight and not weigh a ton. Now, like always, what I'm going to do in this video is give you guys a full in-depth review of the new 6th gen model from Tuxedo Computers, and I'll let you know exactly what I think about it. But before we get into that, I need to give you guys my usual disclaimer. Yes, Tuxedo Computers sent this model over to me to review, but actually I retain full creative control over all videos on this channel, and this review is no exception. I'm going to give you my honest opinion about this model in this video, and Tuxedo Computers was not allowed to screen this video before you guys were allowed to see it. In fact, Tuxedo Computers has never asked to screen any of my reviews before publication, which is just yet another thing I love about that company. With all of that out of the way, I'm very excited to give you guys my full review of the Generation 6 InfinityBook Pro, so let's go ahead and dive right in. So first of all, what exactly is the InfinityBook Pro 14? Well, it's a 14-inch Linux-powered notebook with a 16:10 display with 400 nits of brightness, a magnesium alloy chassis, up to an Nvidia RTX 3050 Ti GPU, and like I mentioned in the intro, it claims to have a battery life that can reach up to 12 hours. In addition, this new model offers a great deal of customization, which even includes the ability to have your own logo engraved onto the lid, which actually makes me wish that I was in the market for a new computer because it would be just so neat to have a notebook with the LearnLinuxTV logo engraved on it, and that would be very cool. Anyway, the InfinityBook Pro has a lot going for it, as its goal is to essentially be everything to everyone, because it has a long-lasting battery to get you through your workday, and an optional Nvidia GPU so you can unwind at the end of the day and, well, play some games. So it definitely has a lot of potential. So the first thing that I would like to explore in this review is the chassis, so let's have a look around. My first impression of this notebook was that it felt very light, a lot lighter than I expected it to be, but at the same time it doesn't feel cheap at all. Since the review unit that I received features an Nvidia GPU, I kind of assumed it would be heavier than it actually is, and that's because typically notebooks with a dedicated GPU tend to be, well, a little bit on the heavy side. And that's especially true considering the extra cooling that's required in order to keep the temps under control. But somehow, Tuxedo managed to keep this notebook fairly light, so if you travel, you can actually carry around a notebook that includes a dedicated GPU without it straining your back. The chassis itself is made of magnesium alloy, but it also feels somewhat thin. But despite the seemingly thin chassis, it still manages to feel solid with minimal flex. The build quality overall seems to match competing Ultrabooks from other manufacturers, so it could definitely hold its own when compared against competing computers. When it comes to ports, the new InfinityBook has just about everything I could ask for. It features 2 USB Type-A ports, 2 USB Type-C ports, HDMI, a full-sized card reader, a combo input-output jack for audio, as well as a barrel connector for power. Now, even though the included power adapter plugs in via the barrel connector that I just mentioned, both USB-C ports support power delivery, so you could charge this notebook from a USB-C charger as well, and if you have a USB-C dock that can support power delivery, then you can actually keep it charged from your dock in addition, which is just great. And speaking of docks, both USB-C ports carry DisplayPort, which means that if you have a docking station that supports plugging in something like a display, you could use that too. In fact, the USB-C port on the right side of the notebook also supports Thunderbolt 4, so basically just about every type of port you could ever ask for is here, with the only exception being physical Ethernet. Unfortunately, with Wi-Fi reaching faster speeds nowadays, physical Ethernet jacks are becoming somewhat rare. But thankfully, Tuxedo Computers includes a USB-C Ethernet adapter right in the box, and that must mean that they understand the fact that a decent portion of their target audience still has a use case for physical Ethernet, but including a USB-C Ethernet adapter is an acceptable compromise in my opinion. Next up, let's talk about the display. And honestly, this might be the shortest section of the entire review because I really don't have much to say about the built-in display other than the fact that it's, well, fantastic. The review unit that Tuxedo Computers sent over to me features their 3K Omnia display, and that display has a 16:10 resolution of 2880 by 1800. And you know what? It just looks so awesome. It's literally the brightest display that I have in the studio right now, even brighter than my primary external display, so I guess I'm a little bit jealous. In addition to that, I also like the fact that there's a very limited bezel, so the screen real estate is maximized in the 14-inch chassis. Anyway, other than that, I don't really have a lot to say about the display. It's really good. Continuing on, let's talk about the keyboard. Overall, I'd say the typing experience is decent, and I don't have any actual complaints. If I had to give the keyboard a numbered rating, I'd say it's probably a 7 out of 10, possibly even an 8. The thing is, it's not going to beat the typing experience of a ThinkPad, but it's absolutely a good keyboard. The best way that I could describe the typing experience on this model is that it feels pretty much the same as a MacBook keyboard, but with additional key travel. Probably somewhere around 50% more key travel than a MacBook Pro. And just like the majority of notebook keyboards nowadays, the keyboard on this model features a backlight, which is great, and it has 2 brightness levels that you could toggle with the Function plus Spacebar shortcut. Also, the Super Key has a laser-etched Tux icon, which is really neat. Now, if you're considering buying the InfinityBook Pro 14 Generation 6, then there's something that I need to make sure that you're aware of that pertains to the keyboard. There's actually 2 different keyboard styles available for this model, and you'll definitely want to make sure that you're choosing the right one. More specifically, you could order this model with the ANSI keyboard or the ISO keyboard. The ISO keyboard in particular has the upside-down L-shaped Enter key and also a smaller Shift key on the left-hand side. By comparison, the Enter key on the ANSI style is a rectangle shape, and that's also true of the left Shift key as well. In the description below, I'm going to include a link to the ANSI and ISO models, so that way you could click on the one you want. But if you want to make sure that you're making the right decision, you could always reach out to Tuxedo and get some guidance. Now let's move on to the touchpad. The new InfinityBook Pro features a very large glass touchpad, and I really like the size of it. I think nowadays I'll never be able to go back to the smaller touchpads that notebooks used to have. This touchpad in particular is very smooth, so your finger just glides right over it. It also features a button to disable the touchpad completely, which you could toggle by double tapping the upper left-hand corner of the touchpad. This might be very useful if you're using an external mouse and you want to avoid accidental mouse clicks from the palm rest. However, even though there's a way to disable the touchpad, I didn't find myself ever turning it off because, well, I never really had an issue with accidental mouse clicks at all. But the toggle is there if you ever need it, and, well, that's a good thing. Anyway, instead of separate buttons, the touchpad can actually be pressed on the lower left or the lower right-hand corners for a left or right mouse click respectively, or you could just use tap to click instead. All things considered, the touchpad is solid and it gets the job done. When it comes to the operating system, the Gen 6 InfinityBook Pro defaults to TuxedoOS 2004. I've covered this distro in greater detail in past videos about Tuxedo computers, so I won't be spending a great deal of time on that in this review. But not only that, this distro is based on Ubuntu and there's a new version right around the corner, so this distro is going to change whenever Tuxedo rebases their distro on the latest LTS release. But in summary though, TuxedoOS uses the Budgie desktop environment. There's actually an official Budgie desktop spin of Ubuntu named Ubuntu Budgie, but rather than ship that, Tuxedo ships a custom distro with some additional features that are specific to their computers, such as the Tuxedo Control Center. The Tuxedo Control Center itself allows you to customize fan and CPU profiles, which gives you quite a bit of control. TuxedoOS is a really good distribution, and I like it a lot. It's integrated very well with the hardware, and it feels like a premium product. But if you'd rather not have a custom distro, Tuxedo Computers also offers Ubuntu as well as Kubuntu, so you do have other options if you want to go a different direction. So what about the battery life? In the beginning of the video, I mentioned that Tuxedo is bragging that you could get up to 12 hours from this computer, but is that true? Well, actually, I was able to squeeze 13 hours of battery life out of it, so I feel completely comfortable with their claims. However, the thing is, if you buy the Nvidia version and you have the Nvidia GPU enabled, well, your battery life is going to take a hit, and that makes sense because, well, Nvidia GPUs are a little power hungry, so it is what it is. But the Nvidia GPU in this model is actually fairly energy efficient, which is impressive. But even despite that, if you have the Nvidia GPU enabled, then you really shouldn't expect to last an entire workday solely on battery. But this machine does let you disable the Nvidia GPU, which is useful if you have no intention to do anything that would require a GPU. But once you disable the GPU, that's when your battery life can actually hit 12 to 13 hours. The current GPU mode is displayed right on the panel, which makes it very easy to know which profile you're using at any one time. For example, an Nvidia icon is shown if you have that enabled, otherwise you'll see an Intel icon instead. You can switch between those at pretty much any time, but in order to do so, you'll need to log out and log in again for the change to take effect. So the downside here is that you'll need to save everything that you're working on before you switch, but that's just the way that hybrid graphics are nowadays. Anyway, with 2 graphic modes on the Nvidia model, as well as no shortage of options for fine-tuning your own balance between battery life and performance, I'd say that this is one of the most energy-efficient notebooks that I've ever used. And all of that is all well and good, but how's the performance? I'd say that overall the performance is great, but that's going to depend on how you configure this model when you go to order one. For example, the Gen 6 InfinityBook can be ordered with either an Intel Core i5 or i7, and that choice will definitely impact performance. But regardless of which CPU you end up choosing, they all feature 4 cores with 8 threads, so you shouldn't actually notice a huge difference between them. When it comes to RAM, the base model starts at 8 GB, but in my opinion, no computer should be offered with less than 16 GB of memory in 2022, so I would go as far as to say that you should order this model with at least 16 GB. And even then, there's still a handful of options to choose between that go all the way up to a maximum of 64 GB of memory. The best rule of thumb here, in my opinion, is to avoid ordering an InfinityBook with only 1 stick of RAM, and any option that utilizes both RAM slots should be plenty. Using 2 RAM slots also ensures that you benefit from dual channel, and my understanding is that on this model, that makes a big difference. So in summary, if you were to order one of these for yourself, make sure to pick a memory option that uses 2 RAM slots and you should be good. The unit that I have in front of me right now shipped with an Intel Core i7-11370H CPU, 16 gigs of RAM, and the Nvidia RTX 3050 Ti, which has 4 GB of memory. At no point did I find this machine slow at all, and in fact, it was quite fast and responsive. Now, your mileage may vary depending on the configuration, but with the unit that I received, I'd say the performance is fantastic. Considering that you can order this model with an optional Nvidia GPU, I definitely want to spend a moment and discuss the performance that pertains to gaming. Now keep in mind that the Nvidia model that you can order this with is the 3050 Ti with 4 gigs of RAM, so you can't expect to max out super high-end games on this machine, but the Nvidia 3050 does manage to impress. For example, when I played Final Fantasy VI on this unit, the performance was so great that it actually maxed out all of my characters to level 99, and because of that, I made quick work of the final boss. Okay, fine, the GPU has absolutely nothing to do with my characters in Final Fantasy VI and how strong they are, and also Final Fantasy VI is not a demanding game, but I just wanted an excuse to show off my perfect save file because, well, I worked really hard on it. Anyway, when I play a higher end game such as Doom Eternal, I found the gaming performance to be more than adequate. I had to use medium settings to run this game in particular, but the fact that a 14-inch lightweight notebook can run a game like this at all, that's actually pretty impressive. So when it comes to gaming, if you keep in mind that the Nvidia GPU has 4 gigs of memory and you keep your expectations in sync with that, I think the gaming performance will be more than satisfactory for casual gamers and be able to handle quite a few games. But how much does it cost? The base model of the 6th generation InfinityBook starts at around $1,400 US. And that seems a bit higher to me than it should be, especially considering that the base model only has 8 gigs of RAM. Considering that 16 gigs of memory consisting of 2 sticks of RAM is only about $60 more, I can't think of any reason not to at least go with that. In fact, I don't really see any reason at all to offer any model with just 8 gigs of RAM, since anything less than 16 gigs nowadays is probably not a good idea. If you add the i7 CPU along with the Omnia display, which also includes the Nvidia GPU, then the price will actually exceed $1,800 US. And at that price point, I'd hope for something more powerful than the RTX 3050 for the GPU. So when it comes to the price of this notebook, I'd say that's actually a downside. Normally, Tuxedo Computers is fairly competitive on price, so I'm not sure if there's supply chain issues due to current events, or if some of the required components have increased in cost nowadays. But anyway, the price point is a bit higher than I'd like, but it is what it is. So what's my overall opinion about the InfinityBook Pro Generation 6 from Tuxedo Computers? Well, overall, I think it's a great piece of hardware. It's very responsive, the performance is great, the operating system is very well integrated. Having an Nvidia GPU in a small chassis like this, that's really awesome as well. So there's absolutely a lot of great things to say about this model. I think for me, the major downside here is the cost, like I mentioned. But if you do actually buy this computer, I do stand behind the fact that I think you'll end up with an awesome machine. Now, another thing that I want to mention real quick is the audio quality, the quality of the built-in speakers, because that's something that people generally ask me about when I review these computers. I'd say the audio quality is about a 6 or 7 out of 10. The thing is, when it comes to 14 and 13-inch notebooks, it's often the case that the speakers have pretty decent sound, but almost nothing in the way of bass. And that's what we have here. So I guess I'm not really sure to consider the audio quality a pro or a con. I mean, it does sound good, but if you're a fan of bass, well, you will be disappointed. Then again, the majority of 13 and 14-inch notebooks that I review, well, the audio sounds pretty much the same as it does on this model. But other than the cost, I really like this computer quite a bit. I had a lot of fun checking it out. I mean, having a 14-inch notebook that can also run games, that's pretty cool. So I do recommend that you check this machine out. It's definitely really great, but also make sure that you compare the price as well, because like I mentioned earlier, I do feel that's a downside. So what are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments down below, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.